There is a war in America. This is War in America. I'm your host, Jonathan Warren. Today is October 1st, 2025. Happy October, everyone. Good afternoon. So, today is the first day of a government shutdown. First one we had in a while. A lot of things have been going back and forth, you know, for several months now. They've been passing continuing resolutions for years now just to kind of kick the can down the road. No one really wants to address the actual budget crisis that we're dealing with and facing, except for maybe Thomas Massie and Rand Paul, the only two good ones we have. Other than that, everybody seems to be content with just making this impending financial collapse even worse. I don't really understand the level of insanity that our leadership seems to operate on, but the main issue in these latest negotiations seem to be refunding the Obamacare subsidies, the ACA subsidies, which were set to expire, I believe. The Democrats insisted on that, as well as wanted health care for illegal immigrants, as far as I know. Though there's some debate as to whether that was actually, a demand or just a something they wanted. However, they do insist on the Obamacare subsidies, and the Senate needed 60 votes to pass the budget. The House passed it, but the Senate needed 60 votes, and they have like 53, I believe. They need 7 more Democrats. They didn't get those votes. Last night at midnight Eastern Time, the government shut down. So right now, everything is closed up as far as national parks go and non-essential, as they say, government offices. However, I think that's going to backfire on the Democrats because, as Mike Johnson pointed out in several interviews, this gives Donald Trump a lot of power and a lot of leeway to kind of decide what aspects of the federal government are essential. And from the last I heard, there's been 750,000 workers furloughed. Now, that's probably temporary, and, it looks like this might reopen shortly. However, there's some other reasons they seem to possibly want to shut it down. As far as I can tell, it seems like there's a special election that was held, that a Democrat was elected into Congress, that would have pushed the vote count to 218 to release the Epstein files, or at least get a vote for it. And so there's a lot of speculation that this might be an attempt to avoid the release of the Epstein files. But it's hard to say. I mean, there's certainly no question that they're willing to cover for these people, these pedophiles and rich and powerful donors who engaged in these terrible acts and were affiliated with Epstein in the first place. So it does seem like that's, possible, to say the least. However, being a right wing person, I don't seem to really have a problem with the government shutdown. In my eyes, this is like, hey, we can't afford to be open, so maybe we should stay closed until we can reopen and see just how, necessary the government really is. And I think this will kind of be resolved quickly. I don't see this lasting a long time, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll last a while. But that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I just think that both parties really try to paint the other as the villain and try to blame the other side. But I just think it backfires on all of them. I think both of them look bad. Both of them take heat from their side. And frankly, I would not care if not a single one was reelected in their next cycle. I think it would be perfectly fine for everyone to be replaced except for Massie and Rand Paul. But, this really does affect regular hardworking Americans. It affects the military and a lot of government employees who really had nothing to do with this, unfortunately. but they will get back pay once it reopens. However, it's just a shame that we keep seeing the government unable to put the people first and really, put their differences aside and do the work that they were put there to do the job that they've been elected to perform. They just seem incapable of doing that. We have all these state sponsored dinners and visits from foreign leaders and things of that nature, but we can't seem to afford, to even keep the doors open. So I just really think it's going to backfire on both of them. It's not a good look. It's kind of embarrassing on an international level. It just shows and speaks to the dysfunction of our federal government and the sorry shape that it's in, how broken the system is. But in the meantime, we're just enjoying the shutdown, taking a break from the government. It's always a nice thing to do. It's just a shame that they can't seem to work out their differences and put the American people first. The ADL, I mentioned that there's been a crusade against the ADL. Musk, Congressman Luna, redheaded libertarian. A lot of people are really riled up against the ADL. I know Marjorie Taylor Greene, is it Green Taylor? I can never remember. But she, pointed out, and many others have pointed out, that their glossary of extremism includes labels such as Christian identity and anti-white sentiments. So obviously there's some issues with the ADL, but they have removed this glossary of extremism, and they're put out a statement that's basically claiming that, this is outdated, it was helpful, but now we kind of need to redo it. That's kind of the position they're taking. But we all know that, it's intentional, and you can't trust these people. So I really hope that this permanently damages the reputation, and moving forward, they're not a source of, authority on any of these subjects. And I hope the administration does not listen to them anymore. Furthermore, it was reported that they've even had a hand in Wikipedia's design and, I guess, framing of information, which is disturbing because a lot of people get information from Wikipedia. I know everyone knows that it's not the most reliable source. And Musk actually introduced and announced that he was making an alternative called Grokpedia or whatever. But Grok really hasn't been reliable lately either, especially when it comes to, matters of Israel and the Charlie Kirk assassination, for instance. So we really are skeptical about that. Not just me, but a lot of people online have been saying that, we really want, a free, open source, reliable information source. But it just seems like everybody has a spin. Everybody has an incentive and motive that's ulterior, So I just hope that it really is a positive development, And I certainly think it is when it comes to the ADL taking a lot of heat and backlash for all the terrible things they said about Christians and white people and the way that they defend Antifa, things like that. So that's probably a good thing that ADL is on the decline, and they've certainly subverted themselves when it comes to, American interests. They've definitely unmasked themselves as an Israel first operation and lobbyist, even, you could call it, a foreign agent of some kind. But now everybody seems to be aware of that, and maybe they'll rebrand or something. They'll have the same organization or a different name. That usually seems to be what happens when these organizations just really sully their reputation in such a way. So I watched Candace Owens' show last night, and I just want to say that Candace Owens really seems to be the only person who was ever close to Charlie Kirk who seems to be really trying to get to the bottom of this and publicly investigating and asking for the public to help analyze videos and submit tips. Yet, I've never seen a coordinated attack in such a way when it comes to like anonymous accounts. And even, some of these bigger names are kind of speaking out when it comes to, like, obviously Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro. But she made a huge claim last night that a couple of days before Charlie Kirk's death, he had actually told everyone, he'd actually announced to everyone that he was going to withdraw support of Israel, which, I take that with a grain of salt. I really interpret that to mean the Israeli government and Netanyahu, because as Tucker Carlson has pointed out, that he was no fan of Netanyahu. Now, that letter that was released certainly did look to me like he was challenging and questioning Netanyahu's judgment, but it certainly wasn't an anti-Israel sentiment. He rather was proclaiming his love for Israel and how much he loved Israel and how pro-Israel he was and how that would never change. But it did seem like he was questioning Netanyahu's judgment and strategy and PR tactics, so to speak. So one has to wonder what had progressed since that letter, which was back in May, between the two. Now, I don't know if there were more communications between them or not, but the claim that Candace made that he was going to stop publicly supporting them and turn against them really, raises a lot of concerns and questions, and a lot of questions about his death and any possible ties or connections to, the supposed transition he was making. Now, this has not been confirmed yet, but I will say that she called out the leaders of Turning Point USA and kind of questioned their silence on this issue, and really just said, hey, if I'm not telling the truth, if I'm not speaking the truth, then refute me, then speak out against me. And so far as I know, no one has. And I find that to be damning. I find that to be very eye-opening and, suspicious, to say the least. Some people said they're under a gag order, but I'm just like, some of these things really have nothing to do with the case itself. Rather, it's just a matter of, is she telling the truth about what happened before he died, And I'm getting challenged, personally, from all these anonymous, accounts, mainly so-called Reuters or whatever, and it's just highly suspicious. But I'm also seeing like anonymous accounts who are really arguing with me about whether he was wearing a vest or not, which, Erica Kirk put out a New York Times article or a statement that said he refused to wear one. They later edited it to say demurred, I don't know how to say that, but which means like he was reluctant to. So they softened the language. I don't think it really changed the meaning of what, he was saying. It sounds like he was still refusing, just, not as harshly. But that seems to be confirmation that he wasn't wearing a vest. But there's still people who are insisting that he was, but it's all coming from anonymous accounts. And I just really got to question whether or not there's an intentional disinformation campaign to kind of, flood the zone, as they say, with different ideas, different contradictory facts, just to throw people off the actual trail. And that's really what it's starting to look like to me. It's really starting to look like this is all intentional. Now, obviously I don't have any proof of that, but you just have to really recognize the patterns and question them. Because I'm like, why is no one putting their name and face behind these claims? Why is no one daring to? Because these aren't, controversial. You're not going to get fired for sitting here claiming you wore a vest. You're not going to get fired for sitting here saying that you don't believe Candace Owens. It's just very bizarre that you're seeing these people having to hide behind anime profile pictures and fake names. They have 100 or 200 followers or whatever. But, everybody's calling me a retard for even thinking Candace Owens might be onto something at all, when she's the only one trying it all. And everything that she said so far seems to line up with the realm of possibility. She came up with this Dairy Queen photo that contradicted the FBI story, and no one can really refute any of these claims. Now, that doesn't mean that proves it, but I really think it does build a little bit of credibility when it just comes to, we should keep an open mind, keep paying attention, keep following the story, And, in time, I think we can all agree that the truth will be revealed, hopefully, because the truth, is what we're looking for. We're trying to figure these things out. I just really hope that, something else doesn't happen that really distracts us from all this and makes this kind of irrelevant to even worry about in the first place. That's really my concern. I really just, I keep seeing Laura Loomer sitting here saying, oh, something's coming, something big's coming, and, you know, take what she says with a grain of salt. No one really likes her. Everybody hates Laura Loomer as far as I know, but you really just got to worry, like, what does she know? What have her handlers told her, whatever. Because there's a lot of accusations of her being a foreign agent or asset of some kind. But I really am worried about that. I'm really worried about something major that would just make it where even looking into these details is a luxury that we may not have later. So I really just hope that we are able to, peacefully get to the bottom of it without a major catastrophe unfolding that'll completely throw us out, take the train off the tracks. But, I will say though, Andrew Colvett is the spokesperson for Turning Point USA, and there's just something about him that seems off. Can't really put my finger on it. I certainly think his whole statement about the Man of Steel and how Charlie Kirk saved other people with his thick bones and things like that was a very strange statement, very bizarre, especially in light of the fact that we haven't even gotten a official confirmation that there was an autopsy done. And I don't know, this guy just seems suspicious. But there was a former ambassador to Turning Point. I didn't write down the name. It was a young woman who had been saying some things critical of Israel and the state of Israel and the government. And then Andrew Colvett allegedly basically said that she, has no affiliation at all with Turning Point. But lo and behold, she comes out later and produces a message from Turning Point, which, severs ties at that point. So he claimed that, there was no connection at all to Turning Point. Then she later is given a message that severs those ties. So there is certainly a misrepresentation there, it would seem. So I think there are starting to, starting to show that there are cracks in this guy's persona and his character. This is just speculation at this point, but it would appear that way. A lot of people saying he has Jewish heritage as well, which, doesn't really mean anything, but it just raises more questions, and just really just raises the level of suspicion that we should have for this guy, especially when he's the face and the voice of Charlie Kirk's organization. So if he has malicious intent, then we should certainly just be on guard against him and take everything he says with a grain of salt. A judge ruled yesterday that deporting people for speaking out against Israel is unconstitutional. Now, this is big because this has been a big problem that I've had with the Trump administration and the willingness to sacrifice the First Amendment rights for the sake of Israel. And, Marco Rubio has been spearheading this. He's been a yes man all the way. He's been excusing it. Basically, argument is that you're here on a visa. You don't have a right to be here on that visa if you act in such a way or say things that is in opposition to America's interest, then you will get deported. You'll get your visa revoked. And obviously that's a violation of the First Amendment. And this judge agreed, and he was a Reagan appointed judge. He gave him a scathing, opinion, a written opinion that, this was unconstitutional and just not okay at all. But it'll likely, be appealed. It may go to the Supreme Court, and who knows what the Supreme Court will say. It's kind of questionable as to whether or not they will permit this or not. I really hope they don't, because at the end of the day, all these people were doing was speaking and just saying they, disagreed with ethnic cleansing and genocide. And I prefer the term ethnic cleansing, but starvation and targeting hospitals children, women, schools, people trying to get aid, all of these things, and then aid workers for that instance. All these things are just terrible. And it's a stain on our history, it's a stain on our country. Furthermore, it's just stupid. Like, there's no guarantee that the Republicans will win the midterms. And doing things like this is just idiotic when Trump ran on such a popular platform. If he just did what he said he was going to do, it seems like he could be, one of the best presidents in history. But it seems like he's slowly but surely going back on each one of the promises that he ran on. And this is a major one when it comes to, I mean, he didn't really, promise either way, but it's just, this isn't something that he ran on, He never said, oh, I'm going to deport people who talk bad about Israel if they're on a visa, which, why would you not be able to criticize a foreign government? They're not even criticizing this government. This is a foreign government. It really makes no sense that we're going to put our neck on the line, hurt our reputation, basically throw the Constitution away in order to serve at the behest of the ADL. This comes up again. ADL was behind a lot of this and pushing for this in Israel. And I just think that it's a disgrace. I think, frankly, that these people will be vindicated, is what I hope. And I think that the Supreme Court, has some decent justices on it for the most part, it would appear. But Merrick Garland, there's a siren. Dallas, Texas, here we are. It's not uncommon. But Merrick Garland, he was the Attorney General for Biden. But at the end of the Obama administration, there was a vacancy, and he wanted to fill it with Merrick Garland. So he wanted to actually put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court, and this guy was super corrupt as an attorney general. So I think it really burst the bubble that these justices are impartial at all. I really think, and Jackson, I think is her name, the black woman who's appointed by Obama. I just think these people have kind of taken their mask off and shown that the justice system is really partisan and political, unfortunately. And I think it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's hard to say what, all these justices will rule on this particular issue, especially when you consider that many of them were appointed by Trump and many of them are conservative-leaning justices. I just really hope that the Constitution and the rule of law comes first. That Mahmoud Khalil guy, he really doesn't seem like a bad guy. He just seems like he didn't want to see children being slaughtered, and I don't think any of us want to see that. Even the so-called Zionists claim that, but yet they justify it. I saw Laura Loomer post something that was like literally arguing that many of these women and children are actual terrorists. They're like, oh, well, they celebrate October 7th at their preschool graduation. And I'm just like, yeah, but they're children. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They're being taught these things. And you can't justify killing them just because of what their parents do or think. God forbid someone blame me for what my parents thought. It's just like, I don't agree with my parents on everything. We're completely different generations. We have different perspectives on a lot of things. But when it comes to just labeling women and children as terrorists and enemies in a war, I just don't think that that's humane. I think that's demonic. I think it's beyond the pale. I think it's frankly horrific and evil. I think Laura Loomer is a true evil person. And I say that with confidence because, a lot of people, I want to see the good in a lot of people, but for some people it's hard to see that. Like when it comes to Netanyahu and Laura Loomer and Mark Levin, these people just seem like living, breathing demons. And they could be possessed for all I know. I don't know, but I'm just like, Jesus, how do you be so callous and heartless toward human suffering, regardless of what religion they are, regardless of what they believe? It's just almost impossible to me to see any kind of commonality with these people. I'm just like, how are we the same species? I can't see from their perspective at all whatsoever. I would, just again, just remind everyone, I got blocked by Laura Loomer. for telling her, Laura, period, everyone hates you, period. And, it was just kind of a troll, and it was something that I took joy in doing. It was a lot of fun. And I would just call on everyone to kind of pick up that mantle and do it themselves, take on that mantle, and really just remind her that she is not a popular person and no one really likes her. And maybe that will eventually, sink in. I don't think so. She seems to really have no feelings at all whatsoever at this point. She seems to be a pure sociopath. So I don't really think it matters. And furthermore, it doesn't seem like she needs a following. It seems like she's back, state sponsored and a foreign agent. So I don't know. Maybe she doesn't care. Maybe she knows everyone hates her. But at the least, it's fun and feels good to take on evil, right? And really defend the innocent, which children are innocent. It doesn't matter what religion or where they're from. I just see so many videos, pictures of babies and young kids without limbs and pouring blood and screaming in pain. And truly, it haunts me. I really have trouble sleeping sometimes because of it. And I've just stopped, following each individual case because it's just overwhelming, and it's got to the point where it's too many to keep up with. And we're responsible, you know what I mean? We're financing this thing, we're protecting these people, we're shielding it from justice. And I just really think that that's one of the main messages that I put out, is that we've got to do everything we can to stop these people. And we've got to regain sovereignty of our own country. I think that is something both the right and the left can agree on. I've seen David Hogg and Anna Kasparian. She has been outspoken on this and even liked a post that I wrote about that. We just need to regain sovereignty. David Hogg is talking bad about AIPAC. This is something we can all agree on, is that, hey, this foreign entity should not be making decisions on our behalf and at our expense for the sake of their interests. That should never be the case, and it should have never been the case in the first place. Everybody's excuse nowadays is like, oh, you're obsessed with Israel. It's like, no, I'm not obsessed with Israel. I would much rather never have to talk about them. But unfortunately, the president, the Congress, and all of our leaders, essentially, media, is all obsessed with them. Our financial systems, they're all obsessed with them. They want to change the subject. They want to be like, oh, focus on the Islamists, the Muslims. And I'm just like, yeah, well, they have Dearborn, Michigan, and they have Minneapolis, Minnesota. Other than that, they're not doing that well, to subvert our government if that's their actual mission. And I think we should be on guard on that. I think we should watch out for that. But at the moment, there's clearly a priority we have to deal with that's much more impending and imminent. We have an imminent threat that's presently going on. So it doesn't really make any sense to focus on one that is potential rather than the one that is actual. So it's just garbage to hear somebody sit here and say, oh, you're obsessed. And it's like, no, I'm not. Everybody else is. And I'm trying to shake them and be like, hey, let's focus on ourselves. Let's focus on our own country. But unfortunately, that's, just people are blind to it, or just determined to not think about it or see it that way. And they've been ingrained into their brains that Israel is our friend, even though they are not compatible with our religion, our majority religion. They literally think our Messiah in the Talmud says he's burning in excrement in hell. It just doesn't seem to align at all with our values. I don't think we should trust these people. And furthermore, Charlie Kirk would always say, and Andrew Colvin even said this, that he would prefer the Jews to rule the Holy Land because the alternative is the Muslims ruling the Holy Land. Well, I'm just like, hey, what if we controlled our own Holy Land? You know what I mean? What if we administered it and just kind of oversaw it, and it could be a place of all religions, equal rights, and the U.S. Constitution would ring true and loud there. Property rights would be respected. There would be justice for killings and the raids of the Palestinian homes, as well as the rapes and murders of the Israelis on October 7th. I think all of these things should be brought to justice. And I don't really think either one of them is in a credible position to do it for the other. So, a third party is probably the best bet. And you're seeing that in Gaza. You're seeing Trump's peace plan or whatever that he's sitting here saying, oh, and I'll talk about that more in a second, but his peace plan, he's sitting here saying that there's going to be some kind of tribunal of, Trump and Tony Blair and Marco Rubio and people like that on this council of some kind, a board that's going to oversee the administration of Gaza. And I'm just like, that may be our only option here. It may be our only option to kind of administer the entire region, though, not just Gaza. I think maybe all of Israel for that matter. And I think, Christian rights would be respected finally, because even Mike Huckabee has said that Christians have been persecuted and discriminated against in the Holy Land, which is aberrant and unacceptable. We cannot allow that. Not at all. He said that, many visas are getting denied from Christian groups, things like that. It's just like, who the do these people think they are? How dare they? How dare they do that? Anyway, let's get back on track. Starting to rant here. So Israel got exposed for supposedly paying $7,000 per post to influencers. So they're, trying this social media campaign. They're trying to recruit and essentially pay people to speak out against Hamas and speak out against anti-Semitism and be super pro-Zionist. But all the videos that I've seen so far are the cringiest thing you've ever seen. It doesn't even look like something that would change anybody's mind for that matter. It just looks like it's going to push people away even further and radicalize them even more. But I'm just like, geez, $7,000 a post. I'm just like, and where's this money coming from? Is it coming from us? Because it's like, if my tax dollars is going to my own indoctrination, that is just beyond sad. My own propaganda. It's just, again, speaks to the sorry state of the affairs that we're in and the sorry state of the country. I just really think it's too little too late for that. I think they're wasting their money and they will not get a return on their investment. And furthermore, they're going to expose a bunch of idiots and kind of derail their kind of future prospects when it comes to whether or not these people are going to, have a good reputation or a good following in the future. Because Lord knows that just it's not popular anymore. The public support has kind of turned away from that. And I really don't think that people have an appetite for that anymore. So when it comes to the peace proposal, I think I made some comments on it yesterday that Trump and Netanyahu did, and how I think it's just trying to essentially delay, I guess, the retribution and backlash that Israel's facing to end the war. It seems like a trap to me. It doesn't look like Hamas is falling for it, because they're essentially sitting here saying, oh, you disarm and the IDF is still going to be there, and then we're just going to, you're just going to have to trust us after that. It's like, if history shows anything, the people who give up their guns are then rounded up and killed. Like, that's just seems to be the pattern of the world. So I don't think, they should do that. It doesn't seem like a smart way to do. It seems like there should be an equal kind of retreat. It seems like, IDF should be backing up at the same time they're doing things. They're calling for the release of all the hostages at once, whereas, that's the only leverage they have at this point. That's the only pressure that the Israeli government is facing from their own people. So I don't know if Hamas has a choice. I think they kind of have to hold on to some. Otherwise, they're just going to be completely wiped out, because we've already seen a lack of restraint. We've already seen a lack of humanity when it comes to how these military tactics are being operated and how these strikes are being conducted. It seems like it's just indiscriminate. It seems like there's no regard for the hostages' safety or lives or return for that matter. And it just seems like they're all about just wiping these people out, making it an uninhabitable place to live, and then shipping them out and moving them, and then moving in a bunch of, Israelis. or even international people. I mean, that's what Trump wanted to do, but it seems like him and Benjamin Netanyahu have completely different views on the topic. They've, publicly said they agree, but it appears to me that Trump wants to make it some kind of Singapore version, Singapore-ish thing, where it's like a city-state of some kind. Whereas, um, obviously, Netanyahu wants it for his own people and his own government. So he's really looking to move these people out, it seems like. And he, even went back on a lot of the things that he publicly said he would agree to with Trump. So he's already agreed, to remove the IDF incrementally, but now he's like telling Hebrew media and Israel media that, oh no, the IDF will stay, we'll get all our hostages back, they're going to give up their guns. And that's just not a good deal for anyone. It's just in too deep. They've fought for years. Too many lives have been lost for them to now just let that go and let it be for nothing, especially when all these countries are calling for a Palestinian state and recognize a Palestinian state. Doesn't seem like, a good option to just surrender at this point and trust the Israeli government, because as many people have noted, they've broken almost every ceasefire they've started. Right now, they seem to be building up weapons and preparing for an attack on Iran again, and completely unprovoked. As far as I know, Iran hasn't really done anything to Israel since the 12-Day War, and yet they're just going to preemptively attack them again. And it's obviously about regime change. It has nothing to do with really a nuclear war, except for the fact that Israel has nukes themselves, So really just get really concerned and anxious when I think about these things, because I don't think that Israel can be trusted. And that really makes a deal difficult. And, I'm not sitting here saying I trust Hamas either, but I think that they have been, fairly reasonable under the circumstances, especially when many of these exchanges have gone well and they've asked for things and gotten them. And then next thing you know, Israel's going back on these deals, and you're sitting here seeing airstrikes in the middle of ceasefires. People are still being killed. They're supposedly passing out aid. At the same time, they're shooting at the people in lines getting the aid. There's so many reports from different doctors saying that there's various wounds to children that look like they've got to be intentional sniper fire. And we just hear these stories relentlessly and nonstop, for years. So obviously there's something to that. Maybe not every single story is accurate, but there's certainly a lot. Former Trump campaign manager is now registered under FARA, the Foreign Agent Act. He registered as a foreign agent to do propaganda for Israel. Now, this is interesting because it just shows how closely tied the Trump administration is to the Israeli government. I know Susie Wiles, what's her name, the chief of staff, was actually some kind of campaign manager for Netanyahu at one point. So they really have some close ties here. And when you sit here and see his former campaign manager working for a foreign government, you got to question a lot of things. You really got to wonder, is now the first time you've had these ties with this government, or have you had them the entire time, And I'm just like, to what level is there a separation between the two administrations? It doesn't seem to be a huge space between them. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for them to breathe. And this at least is, public. Brad Parscale is his name. At least it's a public thing, At least he went about it, according to the law. But I'm just like, it's not a good look. And furthermore, I don't think it's a good industry to be in right now. The pro-Israel propaganda industry is not doing well. I mean, you may make a lot of money, but it seems to be a temporary venture that's going to backfire in the future. It seems like it's going to hurt your reputation and make it hard to make money in the future unless you just move to Israel and become Israeli citizen or something. I don't know. The flotilla with Greg actually, I don't remember her last name. The climate change girl, Greta. who is now, this pro-Palestinian activist, which, is probably a better cause. The climate change thing was really taking a hit and losing favorability. But when it comes to this flotilla, there's like a bunch of boats from like several different countries. There's some Navy vessels from Spain and Italy, um, kind of going along with them. Now, Italy says they're going to turn back after 150 miles, but they're getting, closer and closer, and it does appear that Israeli vessels and Navy vessels are actually starting to surround them, starting to intercept them. And I feel like they've done this like 2 or 3 times already. It's kind of the same story every time. They just sit here and say, "Oh, we're going to bring all this food to Gaza, and we're going to, kind of reveal the state of affairs there." But the Israeli government shows up and ships them back and deports them. But I don't know. It's a symbolic gesture, it seems like. However, it does, I guess, raise awareness at the least. And there were some alleged, intimidation tactics and attacks on the vessel and all these kind of things that they were saying. So I don't know how true any of that is, and I don't know to what extent the Israeli government has been sabotaging it. But they said the drones were dropping fire bombs and things like that on the boats. Some people said it was flares. It's a lot of he said, she said, but it does appear that Israel is not happy about it, and they strongly dislike the fact that it's bad publicity and making them look bad, which I don't know if anything makes them look good at this point. But that is the latest development on that. So I'm gonna shift gears here a little bit. Qatar signs a symbolic security agreement with the United States. I guess I'm not really shifting gears too much because it still has to do with Israel. Every news or aspect of the news, every breaking coverage or whatever, it seems to relate in some way to Israel, and it's just so annoying that we have this small piece of land that really dominates our geopolitics and our global international relations, for that matter. But they attacked Qatar. They were trying to get the Hamas leaders, which I'm pretty sure at one point Netanyahu asked Qatar to host these people. So it's, backhanded and dishonest and sneaky to sit here and say, "Oh, I want you to host these leaders and then, funnel money through you guys to Hamas so that I can prop up this terrorist organization so I don't have to negotiate with somebody for a two-state solution. I can point to them and be like, oh, they're unreasonable. We can't negotiate with them. We're not going to." So we have a major base there. The United States has a major base there in Qatar. And right now it looks like, there's a buildup for another round 2 with Iran. A lot of refuelers and a lot of weapons and equipment are being activated and logistically moved around. So this security agreement is very interesting because it's not like NATO where it's like, oh, you have to do this if this happens. It seems like, oh, we should do it, is almost what like the phrasing and the wordplay is. It seems like the wording of it is very vague. It just seems like, okay. So essentially they're saying that if Qatar gets attacked, the United States will consider that in our national interest and national security to stop that from happening, or that will be an attack on national interests or something like that. But it doesn't explicitly guarantee protection. So the wording is very weak and loose, it appears, but I guess it's a symbolic thing. I really think a lot of these Gulf states and Saudi Arabian countries like that are puppets of Western countries such as Great Britain, France, and United States especially. So it does appear that they have pressure from their own people, and it would make sense that they would have unpopular dissent when it comes to their dealings with Israel and the United States. So I guess this looks like some pacification and appeasement. It looks like they're just trying to not get surrounded by their own people and murdered, and they're just trying to make it look like they're doing something. So there was a deal signed between Qatar and the United States. And now we're going to kind of switch gears. So this was very interesting because at first, it seemed kind of anecdotal. It seemed kind of like a one-time incident. It didn't seem really like a really big deal. But I've seen a lot of, people in MTG, I can never remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She essentially shared it, and then I'm seeing other people share it, that this autistic child who was nonverbal started speaking 48 hours after taking a particular drug known as leucovorin. Leucovorin. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but this is huge. If there's a seemingly treatment or cure for autism, especially nonverbal, because these children are clearly different, but not helpless entirely. Just because there's all these things about like possible and potential telepathy um, powers that they possibly have, or heightened senses that they could potentially have. Everyone knows that autistic people have kind of skills a lot of times with patterns and math and things like that. So it's very interesting to me that there's possibly a cure or treatment. So that would be groundbreaking and huge news if there's a medication they can take and then they start talking. So that's very positive. That's a very great development, and I really hope that there's more that comes from that, because I personally know some people who have children who are like that, and it's so scary. I would like to have more kids one day, and the idea of that happening is just terrifying, and you really don't want to be responsible for it. You don't want to do anything that could cause that for your child, and now they're sitting here saying that Tylenol is potentially tied to it, and you're just like, this is something that you know the doctors and pediatricians had recommended for years during pregnancy and after vaccines were given, to kind of quell fevers, side effects, and pain for the infants. So it's really messed up if we were potentially poisoning our own children. We were potentially poisoning our own children and giving them something that could make them nonverbal, not be able to speak, and not be able to take care of themselves, and need treatment and care from someone else for their entire lives. That's pretty dark, and I don't think people realize how dark that is. I've seen a lot of people sit here and say things like, "Oh no, autism is okay. Autism is great. We don't need to cure autism." And it's just like, oh my God, that is insane. That is an absolutely insane way of looking at it. And I really hope that anything that's preventable should be explored, and any unnecessary suffering should be ended, right? So I really, hope there's more to come from that. This last thing I will comment on, and today I'm sure is one of those days where as soon as I get off, there's going to be a plethora of new news and new information and new stories coming out, new developments. So I may check before I get off just to see if anything has happened in the last, what are we at, 48 minutes? Just, because it is kind of annoying when I'm like, all right, I got it all, we did it all. And then at the very end, nope, there's something way bigger that just happened. So I understand why a lot of people do these kind of shows at, during the evening or even at night or the afternoon, because then you kind of allow the day's progress to be made and for developments to be announced during the workday or whatever, or at the end of the workday. And at the beginning, you just really never know, especially when a shutdown is happening. I'm sure there's a lot of active negotiations and things like that, and things that are developing live, so we'll check real quick. I used to do this show live, but then I realized like you have to have so many subscribers on YouTube to go live, and I was having issues with the microphone. It's a lot easier just to do the video, but I don't edit anything. I don't make any changes anyway, so I don't think it really matters if I do it live or not. But anyway, the last thing that I will comment on is I watched a South Carolina father testify to Congress about his daughter's murder. The name was Logan Frederico. Now, it wasn't, completely detailed what happened, but what I understand, someone broke in, dragged her out of bed, and then shot her or something, and then took her credit cards. There's a bug flying around me. Took her credit cards and went on a spending spree. Now, this guy was somebody who had been arrested or charged with in the past with 39 crimes, 25 which were felonies. And, he's out on the streets. So that seems to be a huge problem, especially in Democrat-led areas, that they're willing to release these dangerous and violent criminals, and they're not protecting, the guy was tearing up, sitting here saying like his daughter probably was wondering where her hero was, her father, and he's tearing up during that, and that breaks my heart because I am a father of a daughter, and I couldn't imagine that. I really try not to think about things like that because that, I'm already radicalized enough. I'm already extreme enough. I don't need to be pushed any further, that's for sure. But like those kind of things really do hit close to home. They really hit me hard. They really do, make my spirit and soul quake with emotion. And I really just hope that this is an eye-opening experience. We've got to protect our children. We've got to protect our women. Iriana Saruska was another example of just horrific crime. This Ukrainian refugee, like 19, I think, or something like that. She's just riding the train home. And, my mom made the point that, like, she didn't really do anything wrong. There was nothing she could do. But I'm just like, okay, well, there's one thing we do need to start doing is paying attention to our surroundings. Everybody's in their own world on their phones. And I'm not sitting here blaming her at all. But I am sitting here saying that we have to, I guess, be aware of the reality that we're facing, which is that a lot of these criminals are running rampant and wild on the street. A lot of violent people, a lot of people who are, from other countries that are allowed in the border. 250,000 a month at its peak during the Biden administration were coming across the border. And so we just gotta really, don't sit in front of people who are bigger than you and look sketchy. Like, I think we just need to, if you're on the train, have pepper spray, have a taser, have your back to the wall. Don't sit in a seat that's in front of anybody. I just think we have to really take these precautions. And I hate that this is the world we live in. I think we should be arming, guards in front of our schools. I hate that this is the state of affairs that we're living in, but I think we have to face reality and be practical and pragmatic about it, because otherwise we're going to continue to see these horrific incidents until we really accept that this is real and this is what we have to do. So I'm just going to check and make sure I didn't miss anything and see if there's any new update. Okay, I did everything I wanted to cover. We got a few minutes left. Oh, I do want to talk about the Pfizer deal that Trump struck. So Pfizer agreed to, in return for being exempt from tariffs for 3 years, agreed to put $70 billion into investing in the United States. There was a big, White House ceremony and photo op. Now, Pfizer, as everyone knows, is one of the major companies that was behind the COVID vaccine, which has taken a lot of heat. I saw a South Korean news outlet saying that it's been linked to cancer. Myocardia, I think, is another condition. It's like swelling around the heart or inflammation around the heart. So all these dangerous and harmful conditions are being uncovered, linked to the COVID vaccine, allegedly, and Pfizer had a big hand to play in that. And so it seems like this might be a way for them to kind of get away from taking heat from that and really being held accountable for that. It looks like they're trying to gain favorability and avoid the tariffs. So they're putting $70 billion into investment, and they've agreed to do some kind of program where they're going to cut drug costs for Americans. So I guess, some of that is good, some of it's bad, but I really don't like the look, how it seems like this is a cop-out for them to avoid accountability for the COVID vaccine. It appears RFK was in on this agreement, and he's been somebody who's been outspoken about this. I'm sure he's, having to compromise to an extent. He's not the president, he's head of HHS, and he, reports to the president. So he may have some limitations here, but obviously I don't think he's been able to do everything he wanted to do, or at least promised he was going to do. But any progress toward reducing medical expenses is serious. Today, I've been trying to find some kind of affordable diabetic treatment for myself, and it is not easy. And it's getting to the point where, like my insulin refill was on back order, and I couldn't even find it. Like I got the prescription, and then I tried to like go to the pharmacy, and they're like, "Oh no, we don't have it. It's on back order. The manufacturer's behind." So then I'm calling all these pharmacies. I have to call like several of them. I finally find one on the other side of town, and they had one vial left. It's just like this is really disturbing when it comes to something that you need to live, right? Like diabetics don't have insulin, and we just basically waste away and slowly die. So kidney failure and heart failure and our brains and our eyes and our circulation is all wrong. And like I think I have osteoarthritis and all kinds of issues. So it's like it really affects your entire body, and we really you know should be a nation, if we're supposedly the richest nation in the world, even though I don't think that's the case anymore with our debt issues, that people should not be going through this. And this isn't a unique experience to me, and I certainly don't want to sit here and be like pity me or poor me or anything like that, but I do feel bad for our country and our citizens who really just want to be healthy and just not have to, I guess, stress about literal just basic health care. So, and China has hit a lot of markers when it comes to their hydroelectric power, when it comes to they built this largest or the tallest bridge in history, and then I saw that they had expanded their lightning rail system to where they're a major leader of that. It just appears like they're really investing in their own people, in their own society, in their own country. And I have a lot of negative things to say about China, but say what you will, like they're kicking our ass when it comes to developing their country, and it looks like that is the future. It just looks like inevitable at this point that the American empire is failing. It looks like the Chinese empire is on the rise and just beginning, and it looks like they're embracing the future and modernity or whatever. So I just really hope that there's not like a breaking point of some kind where China just becomes insanely dominant, and then we're all communist, technocratic, corporate oligarchies. As I said yesterday, I think that might be possible, and it certainly looks like Palantir and maybe even Musk are kind of pushing toward that end, because what's the alternative? Just chaos, civil war, and starvation, and economic collapse. Like that would not be, I guess, better. It'd probably be better to be, I guess, the communist dictatorship. But it's just like, what rate in this future world, and to what extent can our constitution and rights survive? And that is really the question, and really seems to be what's at conflict right now, and what's at risk right now, what's at stake. So I really think now is pertinent to really, it's really important to act now. If we're going to do something about that, if we're going to try to prevent these things from happening, then now's the time. We've got to speak out. We've got to keep fighting. We got to make sure that our freedoms are protected, because it seems like a situation where there'll be abundance. There'll be nobody's going to have to work. All the jobs are going to be done by robots. Yet you can't talk bad about the government. There won't be free speech. There won't be liberty. There won't be the ability to make your own decisions when it comes to your land and your country. It seems like no one will own anything except for a handful of people. And we really got to avoid that. And I hope we do. All right, let me see if there's any other developments real quick. Don't see anything. But yeah, the biggest news today is the shutdown. And so happy shutdown day, everyone. Happy October. I posted today that, I don't even feel like Halloween this year, because it just seems like everything is scary enough. It seems like things are bad enough without having to have some fake fear or any scary things about that occurring. But yeah, I mean, okay, the latest thing that I've seen seems relevant is that Trump allegedly had a phone call with Netanyahu due to concerns that he would reject the Gaza plan, telling him that the U.S. would walk away from supporting Israel if he refused the deal. I don't know if that's true or not, I just find it hard to believe because Trump has bowed and cowed down to Netanyahu. It seems at every turn, except they don't know what the f they're doing line. When he's talking about Iran and Israel after the 12-day war. Other than that, he's really not had one bad thing to say. So I just really wonder to the level and extent that we can believe him. They said a secret service vehicle was on fire at the time that Netanyahu was there. It's just like those kind of things, and the story just disappeared. Those kind of things are suspicious as hell and scary as hell. And I really just think everyone needs to speak up. Everyone needs to do what not necessarily I'm trying to do because I'm following in other people's footsteps, but I do think we need to organize, stand up for our people, and fight for our country in this info war, in this battle of minds and the free marketplace of ideas, while there is such a thing, while there is such a free market, because we're becoming increasingly limited. It does, appear that TikTok has been completely compromised. They banned the juice emoji because I guess people used it to refer to Jews. I didn't know that, but it's kind of funny. But it's just hilarious that they think that's going to work. It's not going to work. It's going to just make people not use TikTok and find some other outlet and platform. And they spent billions of dollars trying to take this thing over that was speaking ill against Israel. And then now, the target is X. All I'm seeing is articles in here saying anti-Semitism is a problem on X, this and that. But I'm seeing crackdowns on X. I got labeled like hateful conduct label or whatever on X for just, basically citing the synagogue of Satan Bible passage in Revelation, and basically saying that the nation of Israel, according to the Bible, is humanity after Christ died, and just basically saying what I said about what I think about the Bible and my interpretation of it is supposed hate speech now on X. So I think we're worse off than we even realize when it comes to our censorship. It certainly seems as though my profile and my outreach is being limited. I used to have 100,000 engagements on silly posts, and now I'm getting 100 or 2 at the most. So I'm not completely blacklisted or completely obscured, but it certainly seems that I'm being throttled in some way. But it's not going to stop us. It's not going to prevent us from fighting back because there's a war in America, and this is War in America. My name is Jonathan Warren, reminding you, keep fighting, live free. Thank you.